I'm Jen Healy. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you for being here. I wanted to start with a little introduction about the Aerial Yoga Play program and the swing. And I'm really happy that you guys are joining us for our first Seattle training. This is super exciting. Thank you, Limber Yoga, for having us. So these swings are pretty special. I don't know if you have had any time in them yet, but they're really stretchy. And that's the first thing that I like to introduce to people is what I'm going to teach. I'm going to train you guys like your teachers. It doesn't matter what you decide to do with it, but I just want to say I'll post things in the category of like when you're with your students kind of deal. So that's how I'm presenting the materials the way you would to your students. The first thing you really want to get used to is the stretch because it's really different. And everything will continue to expand as we go along because these swings are brand new and they do continue to soften and lengthen, but they do have an end point. They're not going to like stretch out infinitely, you know, so they do have like a set point, and then after that they kind of stay. And every time you wash them and dry them, they'll get tight again. So I do encourage you to keep them clean, especially if you have a lot of use. Okay, so that's the first thing I like to introduce is that these materials are really different. The handholds, just follow along with me. The handholds are made of foam, so I hand wash those instead of putting those in the dryer, just so they don't degrade. So hand washing the handholds, that's easy to remember, right? And then wash and dry the swings like you would your favorite sweatshirt. Now the daisy chains, which I also make, the webbing has these notches on them. Now your notches are quadruple reinforced, okay? They're doubled and then doubled again, so there's red and black there. So they're super duper strong, but we don't want to do any Cirque du Soleil moves in them. If you did a big 30-foot drop like you would in rock climbing, they're not made for that and it won't hold. But for what we're doing with suspension training, where we're getting in the swing and we're just hanging our body weight, and typically you'll probably notice that we have one part of the body on the ground for most of the practice. And things in like chilaxin, follow along, good. And things like chilaxin or floating Buddha, we might be in the air, but for most of the time, we're going to have either our feet or our hands or our head actually touching the earth, supporting our weight. And the swing is just here to assist us to go deeper into back bends and inversions. That's what I use it for. So it's actually nice to introduce it as like a yoga swing practice instead of an aerial practice. And I've been, over the last 10 years, refining its name so that it really is a greater representation. So I want you to walk your feet to the front of the mat for me. Keep coming forward, yeah. So you'll notice that we have these awesome red round mats that help us to inform and inspire the spiraling movements in the space. Okay, so I really like using the mats in the practice. If you don't have a round mat, it's 100% okay, but I find that it really does change the perception of the practice. So a lot of what we do are these spins and these spirals in the body instead of the linear movements from side to side. Okay, so really focus on this idea of like a wheel or a sphere, and we're twisting along an axis. And that axis happens to be the plumb line of the swing. So it really helps us find that anchoring in that center point. And once we get more comfortable with the practice, I'll start teaching you some of the sacred geometrics and how to really understand the metaphysics of these movements and why it's so important to open up the field, the quantum field of the body. But today, for Aerial Yoga Play, come on out and give your arms a break. Today for Aerial Yoga Play, we're going to learn the nuts and bolts. That's how I like to describe it. That means the aerodynamics. How can we use the swing in the air in order to assist us to go deeper into our practice? Okay, so I thought it would be fun to record this so you guys can watch it again and be like, okay, wait, what did she say? So don't worry about memorizing anything that we're learning today. It's all available for you. And what I love about this particular training program is it's an online training and it's a video training. So you'll get so much out of the kinesthetic experience and the entrainment with one another, and then you do have the visual and the audio and the written all to reinforce that. But it's just practice, just like the frequency of frequency, I call it. So the more often that you review it, the deeper it'll get into your cells. So just enjoy today. That's what I say. And you know, with the workshops and everything, you'll also get a lot of hands-on experience. So we're going to go for probably about an hour and a half is a good rhythm. We're going to pause, kind of check in with one another, take a little break, maybe like a mini break, and then we're going to do the second half. So we'll have little bite-sized pieces too. So even though we're going to write things down and spend some time like reviewing, really today is about being in the swing and practicing. So we'll review later, but right now we're just going to get familiar with the names and the sequences. Everything is something that I've created over the last 10 years, and so it was developed to be funny and to be playful and to be really inviting as a practice. So sometimes, and this was my experience, is that you get really serious or really tight, so we want to just explore and experience the body in a new way. That's the play part. So can we explore and experience our body? And it also just happens to be fun because it reminds us of a playground, right? And who doesn't love the playground? And so this idea of like moving away from like the hard body boot camp, blah, 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 into this idea that adults can really play their way into accidental fitness, to, have fun fitness. So you will get in shape, you will get strong, you will get flexible, you will find more balance. And all these things are kind of like the positive side effects of using the swing. But the swing for me is really a vehicle of transformation. And that's why I thought it'd be good to just take some time to really understand, why did I create this practice, since you guys are going to become certified teachers. And the aerial yoga play is totally different than aerial yoga. And I love Cirque du Soleil, I love all the different forms, and they're all very complementary. But this is really a regenerative therapeutics practice. But right now, all you have to do is learn the nuts and bolts, right? And then we're going to have a second module where we learn the application, which means if you're interested in the healing practice or the healing arts of it, then I'll show you how to massage in the swing. I'll show you how to target injury and certain like autoimmune disorders, how to work with the endocrine system and the immune system and the metabolism and the hormones, and all these things that are like incredible bonuses that people are always just smitten, just pleasantly surprised that the swing can be that powerful. But it is that powerful. And you'll know when you work with people in the first 5 minutes, like how they're like, oh my God. Even if they've done aerial arts, even if they've done yoga, they'll start to feel nauseous or woozy or just like lose their equilibrium a little bit because their body is changing. So that's why I call it a vehicle of transformation, because people come up to me all the time with just complete astonishment with how powerful it was for them, the way we're wringing out the lymphatic system and incorporating the nervous system with more space and expansion is like incredibly healing to the body. So the expression that I want you guys to take away with today, because I just want you to master the basics, is tractioning the spine out of the pelvis to create more space in between the vertebrae. And I'll say it over and over again, tractioning the spine out of the pelvis to create more space for the vertebrae. And when we create more space, then we relieve the pressure that is on the discs. We create it's kind of like the bottleneck that happens at the Seattle bridges. Yes. I was hanging out last night for a while. I'm like, look, this is exactly what happens in our pelvis. And exactly what happens in our neck is that bottleneck effect. But if we have more space, if we have more openness, then it just flows through. And it makes sense. Okay, it just is common sense, and every single person I work with gets it immediately. They're like, of course. And that's why it's different than yoga on the ground. That's why it's different than any other fitness program or strengthening program. And what we're going to work with today is how can we create as much space in the body so we have this tractioning. And I'm going to go into excruciating detail about alignment because it is super duper important. And once you get it, then you'll be able to get it in a way that you teach other people. And then once we create that space, we're going to strengthen the muscles around the space. So even when you come out of the swing, you're going to be like, oh my God, you're going to feel so much upliftment, so much length, so much openness. And so the tag for Aerial Yoga Play is open, align, release. Open, align, release, right? And so anybody can create more sense of openness and spaciousness in their body. Anybody can have more alignment. Anybody can release tension. So this practice is really for everyone, from a 5-year-old to an 80-year-old. So that's one of the things about targeting demographics that I personally just feel like I work with such a huge range. And we're going to learn the restorative components, the therapeutics components, the dynamic strengthening, and the acrobatics with this one tool. It's pretty amazing, right? And then we'll get into regenerative therapeutics in the second module, not this weekend, the next time you see me. Okay? So I welcome you to ask me any questions or have a short conversation about that now. Don't worry about it being recorded if there's anything you'd like to share before we get into the actual practice. Everybody good? So you don't have to be shy because it's just us. So yeah, it's interactive.
I had noticed I've only done the swing once with Carrie in Idaho, and I noticed I have had knee issues. Okay, 3 or 4 surgeries on one knee. So I noticed that 2 or 3 days after we were doing a lot of probably twisting. So it was probably a lot of in typical yoga, my knees don't twist that way. They really don't. Right? Because you're always in a line a certain way, but this was different. I also was walking in cowboy boots on uneven fields for a long time, so that also could have contributed to that factor anyway. So I just thought I'd just mention that to you. I'm kind of excited to see. I'm starting now just to have a little bit of issues after all these years, just a little bit. But I just thought I'd mention that, and
that's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've had ACL reconstruction on both knees. That are
you
very
have?
engaged.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I had 2 ACLs on one knee.
Yeah. So it was like my hobby to create injury for myself. And I was always very athletic, and that was my pastime. And so one of the things that really drove me to creating like alternative therapies was injury, and that I went from science and engineering and nanotechnology and all this really advanced stuff to the healing arts and creating healing technologies to create solution. So the swing is a solution for helping to heal the body and working with injuries. So for me, I just didn't want to kneel anymore in yoga. I didn't want to do any more squats. I didn't want to do any kneeling. It was just my body after 20 years was like, I've had enough. And
doesn't want to do pigeon. It
won't do it. It was just like, I'm not doing it. I was like, all right. Yeah. And then every class would start in a suit and like a squat, and I'd be like, ugh. And so then I'm like this, acting like I'm disobedient. Right. I'm like, this is it. This is all I'm doing today. And it was just because it would take me about 6 months to recover from an injury in yoga. 6 months, and I was just constantly doing this back and forth with it. And the swing for me is incredibly relieving, and you still have to be aware that there's a lot of scar tissue in the knees that are going to continue to be broken up.
Sure.
So there might be discomfort, but it doesn't mean it's injuring yet.
Okay.
So let's just talk about the knees for one moment, since I am an expert in that field, and it's a really good idea to talk about the hubs of the body, and then we'll get in the swing. So the knee is a hinge. That's all a knee is supposed to do, is to be a hinge. Now, knees turn into a ball and socket when the hips are tight. Now, when we're doing this our entire lives, which is like linear movements, then our hips won't move. Like you said, pigeon. Pigeon has nothing to do with the knee. It has everything to do with the ball and the socket of the hips. So that's why we work with the spins and spirals and opening up the hips. So the knee can be a knee, it can be a hinge, and then the hips can be the ball and socket and learn how to move again. So it immediately tells me that your hips are tight, and we're going to work with that in innumerable amount of details. And then the other major joint of the body are the shoulders. Now the shoulders are also a ball and socket, and most people are just kind of like in their linear movements, and so they have really limited range of motion. So what are we going to work on most with people, and what we want to know how to address properly with the swing? Shoulders and hips, the 2 major hubs of the body. Where does the swing touch? Under the arms and at the hip flexors. Well, that's not too much of a coincidence, right? What are the major injuries that I address? Lower back and neck. These are the 2 major hubs for the nervous system. So it's just like constantly aware of what's happening in these 2 parts of the body. What ultimately heals these 2 hubs is the openness of the front of the spine. Most people are just kind of closed. They're sitting all day. They're driving. They're working a computer. All the things that people do for a majority of their time is actually hindering the central pathway and the flow of both energy and nerves and all that. So there are some mental illnesses that are pervasive in our culture, and one of them is being tired, right? And I only use empowered language, and so you'll notice in the conversation you'll say something to me and I just won't answer. And I'm not being rude. I teach empowerment coaching, and I teach empowerment coaching with the swing, and we want to get out of that sick, broke, tired, stressed, exhausted, all of that. Busy, thank you. I'm all like, I can't even say it. So this has exactly to do with our central nervous system how much openness and alignment we have, and how much power and energy do we hold.
Beautiful.
And it just seems like two totally unrelated things, but I'm telling you, once you get aware of this pathway, of this power, of this energy, of this flow, your entire world will change, like, very quickly. And so we want to be ready to own and operate from that place of power and that spaciousness. And so what the knees represent, what the hips represent, with the neck and shoulders and the head, the whole thing, what it represents, we're going to get into with the AerialYogaPlay program. And it's going to be really exciting when you understand the symbology of the body after you get the nuts and bolts down.
Okay.
So I'll give you a little taste like that. If somebody brings something up, I'll go into some mechanical parts. We didn't even go into the kidney points that are behind the knees that are being hit with the swing that's rebalancing the lower back and knees. We'll go into all of that in the second module, but I'll give you little tastes if you ask me. Do you know what I mean? So I will definitely address something if it comes up. But this is an entirely heart-opening practice. So everything, the swing being behind the back, so the swing's going to start out nice and low. And then when our weight, when gravity does its job, it's going to ride up behind the heart. It doesn't sit underneath the armpits all the way up here. You guys see what I'm talking about? We're going to start at the bottom of the ribs and then let it slide up behind the heart. And then when we lean back, it's going to be a heart-opening practice. And I want us to operate from that center. So when we become centered in our heart and we operate from that place, it's like a whole nother world. Most people, you will see, they're like leading head first and they're moving head first in the world. And we're going to really rearrange and restructure the posture, and then we're going to stack everything on top of that. And it's a totally different reality, all that we're gaining from the swing. I know it sounds like impossible, like, right, yes. Really, we're really shifting our entire reality by hanging in a swing, but truly, it's the most, like, tricky and creative, clever way that we could start to shift and rearrange ourselves while having fun. Okay? So that was the longer version, but I thought it would be really fun.